Just minutes before walking down the aisle, Emily thought she knew the man she was about to marry. She had rehearsed every step, every smile, every tear she might shed. The music was already playing in the church just across the street. Guests were seated. Her father was waiting by the door to take her arm. But here she stood, frozen outside a hotel room, the scent of her bouquet heavy in the air, her hands trembling so hard she could barely keep hold of it. From behind the door she heard muffled voices, two men. A laugh. Then silence. She leaned in closer, her breath shallow, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She told herself she had no reason to be here, that she should turn back, walk away, forget whatever she thought she might hear. But something deep inside whispered that once she opened that door, her life would never look the same again. She reached for the handle, the metal cold beneath her fingertips. And in that moment she had no idea that what lay on the other side would not only shatter her wedding day, but every memory, every promise, every future plan they had ever made together. What Emily discovered that day would leave her questioning not just her fiancé's love, but the very foundation of trust itself. But how did it come to this? And what happened after will leave you questioning everything. Before we unravel this unbelievable wedding day scandal, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if gripping real-life stories keep you hooked like they do us, subscribe so you never miss the next one. Emily was 28 years old, a marketing professional whose friends described her as warm-hearted, meticulous, and the kind of person who remembered every birthday. She had grown up in a quiet coastal town where everyone knew everyone, a place where weddings were community events and reputations carried weight. Daniel was 31, a charming lawyer with a polished smile and an easy way with words, someone who seemed to fit perfectly into every social circle. He was well respected in the community, admired for his career success and his family's long-standing presence in town. When they first met at a charity event 3 years earlier, it felt like the start of something people in movies talk about, a connection so immediate it seemed inevitable. The proposal came on a windswept pier at sunset, a ring glinting in the fading light, captured in photos that soon made their way to Instagram. Friends and family called them the perfect couple, their feeds filled with weekend getaways, holiday dinners, and smiling selfies that looked like happiness frozen in time. But even in those perfect pictures, there were moments Emily couldn't quite put into words. Unexplained late nights at the office, a friend Daniel never introduced, glances at his phone that lingered a little too long before he locked the screen. She told herself not to overthink it, but deep down she felt the faintest ripple beneath the calm surface of their life together. Still, the wedding was set. 150 guests had RSVP'd, the historic church was booked, and both families had poured money and pride into the day. In a town like theirs, this was more than a marriage, it was a public promise, one everyone was expecting them to keep. In the months leading up to the wedding, there were moments, small, fleeting, when Emily felt something she couldn't quite name. One of the first came late on a Tuesday night. She had woken up thirsty and wandered into the kitchen for a glass of water. From down the hall she heard Daniel's voice, low and tense, coming from his office. She paused by the doorway, catching fragments of a conversation. "I told you, this isn't the time," he said, his tone sharp in a way she rarely heard. There was a pause, then a muffled voice on the other end of the line, and Daniel's reply came, almost pleading, "Now, you have to trust me." She stepped back, suddenly aware of how strange it felt to be eavesdropping on the man she was about to marry. The next morning she asked about it over coffee. He smiled, dismissive, saying it was a difficult client and that it wasn't worth worrying about. She wanted to believe him, but the edge in his voice from the night before stayed with her. Then came the rehearsal dinner. It had been a perfect evening at first. Families mingled, friends laughed, and Emily found herself thinking that maybe she had been too quick to let suspicion settle in her mind. But halfway through the evening she noticed Daniel was gone. At first she assumed he'd stepped outside to take a call, but when 15 minutes passed, then 30, she began asking around. No one had seen him leave. She texted him, no reply. Called twice, straight to voicemail. Nearly an hour later he returned, smiling as though nothing had happened. When she asked, he said he'd needed to clear his head, that the pressure of the day had been overwhelming. She nodded, but deep down a quiet unease was beginning to take root. She told herself love meant trust and she still loved him. She wanted to believe the best, but she had no idea the truth would confront her on the very day she said, "I do." The morning of the wedding dawned bright and warm, the sea breeze slipping in through her window. Daniel had been the first to text her, a simple, "Good morning, beautiful. I've got a surprise for you later." He said he needed to run an errand before getting ready, that it would make the day even more special. She smiled at the message, choosing to believe it was something sweet. But as the hours passed and the photographers began arriving, Daniel still wasn't at the venue. Her calls went unanswered. Her maid of honor told her not to worry, that grooms always cut it close. But with every tick of the clock, the unease she had been pushing down for months began to rise, sharp and undeniable. The morning light poured in through the lace curtains, casting soft patterns on the floor of the bridal suite. Emily sat at the vanity while her bridesmaids fluttered around her, curling her hair, touching up her makeup, adjusting the delicate veil that draped over her shoulders. Laughter filled the air, and to anyone watching it looked like joy. But inside, Emily's chest was tight. Every now and then, her smile would falter, her gaze drifting toward the clock on the wall. Daniel still hadn't arrived at the venue. She tried to push the thought away, telling herself he was just with the groomsmen, getting dressed, maybe running last-minute errands. After all, she had a room full of people focused on her, and she couldn't let her mind wander into shadows. Then, as her maid of honor handed her a glass of water, Emily's phone buzzed on the table. She almost ignored it, but the screen lit up, not with a message but with a notification she hadn't expected. Daniel's location had been shared on Find My iPhone. She hadn't even realized it was still connected to her phone, a leftover from when they'd tracked each other's whereabouts during a weekend trip months ago. Without thinking, she tapped the notification. A map appeared. Her stomach dropped. Daniel's pin wasn't at the church or anywhere near it, it was at a hotel just a few blocks away. Her maid of honor leaned in, curiosity etched across her face. "Should we check?" she whispered, her voice low enough that the other bridesmaids, still caught up in their chatter, wouldn't hear. Emily hesitated. She wanted to say no, to believe there was some harmless explanation, that he'd stopped to meet a relative, or to pick something up for the ceremony. But the feeling in her gut was different this time. It wasn't the vague unease of the past few months, it was sharper, heavier, the kind of instinct you can't reason away. She stood up slowly, her dress brushing against the carpet, and slipped her phone into her clutch. "I just need a moment," she said to the room, forcing a smile. Her maid of honor gave her a knowing glance and followed her out into the hallway. Emily told herself she was only going to ease her mind, that she'd walk over, find him, and laugh about this later. But somewhere deep down, she knew the truth might not be something she could laugh about at all. If Emily had stayed in that room, she would have never known. But she decided to go. Each step toward the hotel felt heavier than the last. The streets between the church and the hotel seemed longer than they ever had before, the sound of her heels echoing in the quiet morning. Her heart thudded in her chest, each beat loud enough to drown out the distant noise of traffic. She replayed every strange moment of the past few months in her mind, the late-night phone calls, the unexplained absences, the message from the unknown number. They all began to connect in ways she didn't want to admit. When she reached the hotel, the lobby was nearly empty, save for a clerk who barely glanced up from the desk. Emily's hand trembled as she pressed the elevator button, the metallic doors sliding open with a soft chime. Inside, the seconds seemed to stretch, the floor numbers changing with an agonizing slowness. She stepped out into a quiet hallway, the carpet muffling her footsteps. She didn't need to check the room number, she knew exactly where she was going. Just as she reached the door, she heard it. Muffled voices. 2 men. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. One of them laughed softly, followed by a pause, then a murmur she couldn't make out. She felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, a split second in which she could turn around and walk away, pretend she'd never been there. But her hand moved before her mind could stop it, fingers brushing against the cold metal of the handle. Emily's hand hovered over the door handle, her fingers trembling so badly she could hear the faint rattle of metal against metal. Her pulse was in her ears, drowning out every sound except the muffled voices inside. She pressed her palm flat against the cool brass, the cold biting into her skin. For a long moment, she stood there, barely breathing, her mind flipping through every possible scenario, none of which prepared her for what she was about to see. Slowly she turned the handle. The latch gave way with a soft click, and the door creaked open, the sound slicing through the quiet like a warning. She stepped inside just far enough to see the bed. Time seemed to slow, the air thickening around her. 2 figures lay tangled in the sheets, Daniel and beside him his best man Mark. The sunlight through the half-drawn curtains cut across them in narrow lines, exposing bare shoulders, startled eyes. Daniel froze, his expression shifting from confusion to a kind of fear she had never seen in him before. Mark's hand gripped the edge of the sheet, pulling it quickly to his chest as if fabric could undo the truth. Emily's bouquet slipped from her grasp, hitting the carpet with a dull thud, petals scattering across the floor like pieces of something already broken. Her mouth went dry, her body numb. In that moment, Emily's future, her love, her trust, all collapsed in a single breath. She didn't scream. She didn't demand answers. The room was thick with silence, the kind that feels louder than any shout. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low, almost pleading, "I can explain." But she had already turned, her steps unsteady as she moved toward the door. She didn't look back. She couldn't. What Emily didn't know was, this wasn't the first time. Emily didn't remember the walk back to the bridal suite. Her mind had retreated into a kind of cold, quiet place, where every sound was distant and every face blurred at the edges. She closed the door behind her and stood there for a long moment, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was still wearing a wedding dress, still wearing makeup meant for photographs, still holding herself together in all the ways she had rehearsed for this day. But underneath she felt hollow. That hollow space didn't stay empty for long, that it filled quickly, with heat, with anger, with the sharp sting of betrayal that clawed its way up her throat until she could barely breathe. The shock had been paralyzing, but the rage was something else entirely. It made her want to rip the veil from her head, to tear the dress at the seams, to erase every piece of this day from her skin. Outside the suite, the hum of conversation began to change. At first it was muffled, casual, the sound of guests waiting for a ceremony to start. But as the minutes passed, voices sharpened. She could hear snippets through the door. "Has anyone seen Emily? Why isn't she here yet? What's going on?" The questions multiplied, and with them came whispers, the kind that move fast in small towns. Her phone buzzed again and again, texts from friends, from relatives, from people who had no idea what was unfolding just a few hundred feet away. She ignored them all. Meanwhile, Daniel was already trying to reshape the story. Through one of the bridesmaids, Emily learned he had told a few people it was all a misunderstanding, the result of too much to drink the night before. He painted it as an accident, a stupid, meaningless mistake, nothing worth destroying the wedding over. But as the hours unfolded, pieces of the truth began slipping into her hands. A cousin who worked at a local hotel sent her screenshots of bookings under fake names. Reservations Daniel had made for himself and Mark, stretching back over the past year. One of her closest friends, suspicious for months, admitted she had once seen Daniel with a second phone. And then there were the emails, found by Emily's maid of honor when Daniel, in his haste, had left his laptop open in the groom's room. The messages were intimate, coded in ways that left no doubt about the depth of their relationship. Her family was furious. Her mother, her voice trembling, told her she had to cancel, that no amount of embarrassment could justify walking down the aisle after what she had seen. But her father, always cautious about appearances, urged her to think about the town, the guests, the investment both families had made. "You can still go through with it," he said quietly, "and deal with the rest later." His words felt foreign, almost absurd. She realized they were less about her happiness and more about preserving something that was already gone. It was in that moment, sitting on the edge of the vanity table with her dress pooling around her feet, that she learned the truth she hadn't even thought to question. Mark hadn't just appeared in Daniel's life recently. He had been there long before Emily had ever met him, an on and off presence for years, a shadow in the background of every relationship Daniel had tried to have. Their history was long, complicated, bound by a kind of loyalty Emily had mistaken for friendship. She stared at her hands, at the ring Daniel had slipped on her finger only during the rehearsal the day before, and she thought of the anonymous text that had warned her, "You don't know who you're marrying." Whoever had sent it had been right. But if this was a secret love, a relationship Daniel had fought to keep alive for so many years, why marry her at all? That was the question that kept looping in her mind, one she knew she needed an answer to, even if it meant unraveling everything she thought she knew about the man waiting for her in another room. Emily found herself back in the same chair where her bridesmaids had pinned her veil that morning, though now the veil lay crumpled in the corner, its comb bent, its lace twisted. Her body felt heavy, like every muscle had decided to stop obeying her, but her mind was sharp, too sharp, grabbing hold of every detail, every unanswered question. She didn't go looking for Daniel, she didn't need to. He came to her, knocking softly before slipping into the room and closing the door behind him. For a long moment he didn't speak. His eyes darted anywhere but her face, over the flowers on the vanity, the scattered makeup brushes, the champagne glasses still half full from earlier. Finally he said her name, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. Then, in a voice stripped of the usual charm, Daniel began to explain. He told her about the weight of his family's expectations, how the Daniels had built their name on appearances, on tradition, on the image of perfection that the town had been fed for generations. His parents had never been subtle. A respectable marriage to a suitable woman was the cornerstone of keeping their reputation intact, and with it, a sizable inheritance that depended on his compliance. It wasn't that they didn't know about Mark, he said, but that they refused to acknowledge it. To them, Mark was a phase, a risk, a problem that could be quietly buried beneath the kind of marriage people took pictures of and framed on mantles. Mark, however, had never wanted the wedding to happen. In fact, Daniel admitted the anonymous text Emily had received, "You don't know who you're marrying," had come from him. It was a last attempt to force Daniel's hand, to stop him from walking into a life neither of them truly wanted. "I thought I could manage it," Daniel said, his voice faltering. "That I could keep everyone happy. My family. Mark." He let out a bitter laugh. "Turns out I couldn't keep anyone." Emily sat in silence, her nails digging into the fabric of her dress. The truth settled over her slowly, like ash after a fire. She hadn't just been betrayed, she had been used. Her warmth, her stability, her reputation, they had been pawns in a much older, much colder game. She wasn't the love of Daniel's life. She was the cover. The alibi. The final piece needed to complete the picture his family demanded. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a lifetime of lies, and she had been the final piece in a game she never knew she was playing. Emily stood in the bridal suite doorway for a long moment, her hand resting on the frame, the murmurs from outside leaking through the thin wood. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed, unaware of the storm about to break. She could hear the faint clinking of glasses from the reception area, the polite chatter of guests trying to pass the time. Her father's voice echoed in her memory from earlier that morning, "You'll make a beautiful bride, Em. Everyone's here for you." Now, those same people were waiting for a ceremony that would never happen. Her heartbeat slowed, not from calm but from clarity. She knew exactly what she was going to do. She stepped out into the hallway, ignoring Daniel calling her name behind her, ignoring the frantic footsteps of her maid of honor trying to catch up. The walk from the suite to the main entrance felt impossibly long, the kind of slow march that burns every step into your memory. When she reached the threshold of the room, all conversation stopped. 150 pairs of eyes turned toward her, a sea of expectant smiles that faltered the moment they saw her face. She didn't reach for a microphone. She didn't need one. Her voice carried in the heavy silence, steady but sharp. "The man I was about to marry," she began, her gaze sweeping over the crowd until it found Daniel standing in the back, "is in love, but not with me." Gasps broke through the air like cracks in glass. A few people looked at Daniel. Others whispered to each other. Somewhere near the front, a phone rose into view, its little red recording light blinking. "I won't be walking down that aisle today," Emily continued, her tone unwavering. "Because the person I thought I knew, the person you all thought you knew, has been lying. And I won't build a marriage on lies." Phones came up everywhere now. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Daniel's parents sat stiff and pale, their eyes fixed straight ahead. No one moved to stop her. She took one last look at the crowd, the flowers, the aisle she'd rehearsed walking just the night before, and then she stepped away, leaving the room in stunned silence. By evening, the clip of her speech had already been shared thousands of times. By the next morning, millions had seen it. Daniel's name trended online, not for his successful cases but for the scandal. His parents, once untouchable in their coastal town, now avoided public places. Mark was gone by the end of the week, his apartment emptied overnight. And Daniel's carefully built career began to crumble in real time. Months passed. The town where it had all happened became nothing more than a pin on a map, a place Emily once knew but no longer belonged to. She sold the house she'd once dreamed of sharing with Daniel. She packed her life into boxes, leaving behind the dress she never wore and the invitations that would never be mailed. By the time spring rolled in, she was living 3 states away, in a small apartment with tall windows and no ghosts in the walls. Her days no longer began with the weight of someone else's expectations. She took long walks by the waterfront, learned to cook for one without feeling lonely, and surrounded herself with people who didn't measure her worth by the role she played in their image. Friends noticed the change in her, the lighter laugh, the steadier gaze. It wasn't about forgetting what happened, it was about no longer letting it define her. The video of her wedding day speech had long since stopped trending, replaced by the next scandal, the next story. But for Emily, its ripple effect was permanent. It had ended one chapter of her life in the most public, painful way imaginable, and yet, in the quiet that followed, she discovered something she hadn't expected: peace. Sometimes the worst day of your life can be the first day of your freedom. And that brings us to you. If you were in Emily's shoes, standing there in front of 150 people, the truth in your hands, would you have walked away, or gone through with it? Tell us in the comments. Your answers might surprise you, and maybe even you. And if this story shook you like it did us, hit that like button. It helps us share more real-life stories every single week. Stories that remind us just how much can change in a single day.